Tyrone Bowman live. Welcome to the program and welcome to the conversation on today. Today I'm going to be talking about an individual who rightfully deserves to be remembered for his contributions to so many wonderful things that he did in the world of music, the one and only Duke Ellington. Class, elegance, pizzazz. He was definitely a first-class gentleman. So exactly who was Duke Ellington? Well, a brief overview. Duke Ellington was a great, without question, a great jazz pianist, awesome composer, songwriter, band leader, arranger, conductor, and he even did some acting. So he's in profile today on Tyrone Bowman Live. Duke Ellington was born and raised in Washington, D.C. Ellington was based in New York City from the mid-1920s and gained a national profile through his orchestra's appearances at the Cotton Club in Harlem. A master at writing miniatures for the 3-minute 78 RPM recording format, Ellington wrote or collaborated on more than 1,000 compositions. His extensive body of work is the largest recorded personal jazz legacy, and many of his pieces have become standards. He also recorded songs written by his fansmen such as Juan Gazzo's Caravan, which brought a Spanish tinge to big band jazz. At the end of the 1930s, Ellington began a nearly 35-year collaboration with composer, arranger, pianist Billy Strayhorn, whom he called his writing and arranging companion. With Strayhorn, he composed multiple extended compositions or suites, as well as many short pieces. For a few years, at the beginning of Strayhorn's involvement, Ellington's orchestra featured bassist Jimmy Blanton and tenor saxophonist Ben Webster, and reached what many claim to be a creative peak for the group. Some years later, following a low-profile period, an appearance by Ellington and his orchestra at the Newport Jazz Festival in July 1956 led to a major revival and regular world tours. Ellington recorded for most American record companies of his era, performed in and scored several films, and composed a handful of stage musicals, although a pivotal figure in the history of jazz. And at one time, Harlem was the place for every major jazz writer, arranger, composer. What's up, my brother? How you doing over there? At one time, it was in Harlem that the greatest and the best of the best, that's where they congregated at. The best writers, the best singers, the best performers, the best everything is what they did. And it's totally awesome. Today, you wouldn't even recognize Harlem when you come through Harlem because of gentrification and so many other things. But Harlem was it. When men like Ellington and others, when they would finish performing their sets, they would just go to another jazz club and another until the sun came up the very next morning. Although a pivotal figure in the history of jazz, in the opinion of Gunther Schuller and Barry Kernfield, the most significant composer of the genre, Ellington himself embraced the phrase, quote, beyond category, end quote, considering it a liberating principle and referring to his music as part of the more general category of American music. Ellington was known for his inventive use of the orchestra or big band, as well as for his eloquence and charisma. He was awarded a posthumous Pulitzer Prize Special Award for Music in 1999. They should have given it to him during his lifetime. Why is it that America has this fantasy with wanting to honor people after they're gone, after they've transitioned. Why don't you appreciate people while they're alive and well and healthy, when they can enjoy the acclaim? Yeah, I know some of y'all don't like that, but I really don't care. I don't want anybody doing anything in my memory when I'm dead and gone. I won't be able to see or hear or know anything that's happening. So, exactly who was Duke Ellington and where did he come from? Ellington was born on April 29, 1899, to James Edward Ellington and Daisy Kennedy Ellington in Washington, D.C. Both his parents were pianists. Daisy primarily played parlor songs, as they were called back then, and James preferred operatic arias. They lived with Daisy's parents at 2129 Ida Place, now Ward Place, Northwest in D.C., West End, the West End part of the neighborhood. Duke's father was born in Lincolnton, North Carolina, on April 15, 1879, and in 1886, he moved to D.C. with his parents. Daisy Kennedy was born in Washington, D.C. on January 4, 1879, the daughter of two former American slaves. Now, that's important to note, that his mother was actually born probably toward the end of slavery, going into the Emancipation Proclamation period. And that's when Ellington was born. James Ellington made blueprints for the United States Navy. Of course, history won't tell you what I'm going to tell you today. And that's why it's important that this program remain an educational, informative program where people can learn and grow and develop and even share with others if they choose to. At the age of 7, Ellington began taking piano lessons from Marietta Clinkscales. What a name! Daisy surrounded her son with dignified women to reinforce his manners and teach him elegance. His childhood friends noticed that his casual, off-tan manner and dapper dress gave him the bearing of a young nobleman, so they began calling him Duke. Ellington credited his friend Edgar McEntee for his nickname. Quote, "I think he felt that in order for me to be eligible for constant companionship, I should have a title. So he called me Duke," end quote. Though Ellington took piano lessons, he was more interested in baseball. President Theodore Roosevelt would come on his horse sometimes and stop and watch us play, Ellington recalled. Ellington went to Armstrong Technical High School in Washington, D.C. His first job was selling peanuts at Washington Senators baseball games. Ellington started sneaking into Frank Holloway's pool room at age 14. Hearing the music of the pool room pianist ignited Ellington's love for the instrument, and he began to take his piano studies seriously. Among the many piano players he listened to were Doc Perry, Lester Dishman, Lewis Brown, Turner Layton, Gertie Wells, Clarence Bowser, Sticky Mac, Blind Johnny, Cliff Jackson, Claude Hopkins, Phil Ward, Caroline Thornton, Lucky Roberts, U.B. Blake. I'm going to profile him as well. U.B. Blake's contributions to Broadway and all the songs that he wrote are totally, totally awesome. Some after U.B. Blake, Joe Rochester, and Harry Brooks, some of his mentors. In the summer of 1914, while working as a soda jerk at the Pootie Dog Cafe, Ellington wrote his first composition, Soda Fountain Rag, also known as the Pootie Dog Rag. He created the piece by ear, and as he had not yet learned to read and write music, quote, "I would play the Soda Fountain Rag as a one-step, two-step waltz tango and foxtrots," Ellington recalled. "Listeners never knew it was the same piece. I was established as having my own repertoire. In his autobiography, Music is My Mistress, written in 1973, and I did read it, Ellington wrote that he missed more lessons than he attended, feeling at the time that piano was not his talent. Ellington continued listening to, watching, and imitating ragtime pianists, not only in Washington, D.C., but also in Philadelphia and Atlantic City, where he vacationed with his mother during the summer. He would sometimes hear strange music played by those who could not afford much sheet music for variations. They played the sheets upside down. Henry Lee Grant, a Dunbar High School music teacher, gave him private lessons in harmony with the additional guidance of Washington pianist and band leader Olive Doc Perry. Ellington learned to read sheet music, project a professional style, and improve his techniques. Ellington was also inspired by his encounters with stride pianist James P. Johnson and Lucky Robert. Later in New York, he took advice from Will Marion Cook, Fats Waller, and Sidney Bechet. He started to play gigs in cafes and clubs in and around Washington. His music, or rather his attachment to music, was so strong that in 1916, Ellington turned down an art scholarship to the Pratt Institute in Brooklyn. 3 months later, before graduating, he dropped out of Armstrong Manual Training School, where he was studying commercial art. Let me clean my glasses. Give me a minute. So Ellington, a fascinating individual. And his story really hasn't been told. It should be told. And you know how I do it over here. Everything I can find about black people in a positive light, I'm talking about it. I don't care if folks get upset, don't like it. Well, on this channel, we're black all day, every day, unapologetic. So in the next video, I'm going to talk about Ellington's professional career, his personal life, his death, his legacy, the discography, the awards and honors. Duke Ellington's life, great testament to what can be achieved if you want to achieve it. It's up to individuals. No matter how hard our lives are, we can moan and groan and complain, or we can do something about it. Nice to know you're a jazz enthusiast. Hey, you got it. Yes, I love jazz. I really do. I'm not just talking about this here. Jazz is a major part of my life. So let's talk about the Duke's upbringing. As I said, I don't want to rehash that one. I want to talk about Ellington's early career. Ellington was working as a freelance sign painter. From 1917, Ellington began assembling groups to play for dances. In 1919, he met drummer Sonny Greer from New Jersey, who encouraged Ellington's ambition to become a professional musician. Ellington built his music business through his day job. When a customer asked him to make a sign for a dance or party, he would ask if they had musical entertainment. If not, Ellington would offer to play for the occasion. He also had a messenger job with the U.S. Navy and State Departments, where he made a wide range of contacts. Ellington moved out of his parents' home and brought his own as he became a successful pianist. At first, he played in other ensembles, and late 1917 formed his first group, the Duke's Songwriters, or Colored, as they called it back then, Syncopators. His telephone directory advertising proclaimed he was also the group's booking agent. His first play date was at the True Reformer Hall, where he took home 75 cents. And that was a lot of money back then. Ellington played throughout the D.C. area and into Virginia for private society balls and embassy parties. The band included childhood friend Otto Hardwick, who began playing the string bass, then moved to C melody sax, and finally settled on alto saxophone. Arthur Wetzel on trumpet, Elmer Snowden on banjo, and Sonny Greer on drums. The band thrived, performing for both African American and white audiences rare in the segregated society of the day. Now, let me show you this picture here. This is important. This is how the records used to look. That was a 73 RPM. They called it the Victrola. It was played on the Victrola. All right, let me get back to Duke, his career. Oops, my bad. All right, Ellington, where you at? Let me pull him back up. I'm talking about his education. All right, I'm into Ellington's career now. So he moved out of his parents' home. His first gig, he made 75 cents. Ellington played, as I said, around and through Washington, D.C. When his drummer, Sonny Greer, was invited to join the Wilbur Swing Orchestra in New York City, Ellington left his successful career in D.C. and moved to Harlem, ultimately becoming part of the Harlem Renaissance. New dance crazes such as the Charleston emerged in Harlem. They used to show the white actors and actresses only doing the Charleston, all these dances. Well, who do you think they learned them from? Who do you think Fred Astaire learned how to dance from, and all these other great people? They don't. Nobody wants to talk about Bill Bojangles Robinson, but I'm going to profile him as well. He's the one who taught Shirley Temple and so many other people in Hollywood to dance. And he was a great, great, great singer. Then when he went to Hollywood, which he should have never done, what did they reduce him to? To being a butler. And just dancing and one of those happy black folk and all that kind of foolishness. When he was somebody in his own right before he went to Hollywood. So new dance crazes such as the Charleston emerged in Harlem, as well as the black music theaters, including Eubie Blake's and Noble Sisters, the latter of whom was his neighbor, shuffle along after the young musicians left the Sweetin Orchestra to strike out on their own. Check this out. They formed an emerging jazz scene that was highly competitive. That's what they found. The jazz scene was really competitive with difficult inroad. They hustled pool by day and played whatever gigs they could find. The young band met stride against Willie the Lion Smith, who introduced them to the scene and gave them some money. They played at rent house parties for income. After a few months, the young musicians returned to Washington, D.C., feeling discouraged. So if you're a musician out there and you're listening to me, you're going to feel discouraged. But if that's what you really believe that you were put on this earth to do, stick with it. The rewards will come at some point in time. Stick with it. I'm working on a lot of things. I don't talk about everything I do, but I'm working on a number of projects, and I'm going to stick with them until they're successful. In June 1923, they played a gig in Atlantic City, New Jersey, and another at the prestigious exclusive club in Harlem. This was followed in September 1923 by a move to the Hollywood Club at 49th and Broadway, and a 4-year engagement which gave Ellington a solid artistic base. Now you got to realize the times that Ellington and his band and his repertoire were moving throughout America. This was not easy for these black brothers to do, but they did it anyway. This is a side note, but it's a good one. In this day and age, people give up because they say, oh, it's too hard. It's too difficult. I didn't sign up for all this. Well, what did you sign up for? No one's just going to give you something because you think you should have it. Got to work for it. Unless you come from one of those privileged backgrounds, in privileged families, and you think you own the world and everybody's supposed to bow down to you. Well, don't go like that. So Ellington and his band, they got a 4-year gig, and they're doing good. LG, life was good for them. The group was initially called Elmer Snowden and his Black Sox Orchestra. Wow. It had 7 members, including trumpeter James Bubba Miley. They renamed themselves the Washingtonians. Snowden left the group in early 1924, and Ellington took over as band leader. After a fire, the club was reopened as the Club Kennedy, often referred to as the Kentucky Club. Ellington made 8 records in 1924, receiving composing credit on 3, including Choo Choo. In 1925, Ellington contributed 4 songs to Chocolate Kitties, starring Lottie Gee and Adelaide Hall. And that was an all-black venue or review, which introduced European audiences to Black American styles and performers. Duke Ellington and his Kentucky Club Orchestra grew to a group of 10 players. They developed their own sound via the non-traditional expressions of Ellington's arrangements, the street rhythms of Harlem, and the exotic sounding trombone growls and wah-wahs, high-squealing trumpets and saxophone blues, licks of the band members. Sidney Bechet played with them, reportedly becoming the dominant personality in the group, with Sonny Greer saying Bechet fitted out the band like a glove. Wow. His presence resulted in friction with Miley and trombonist Charlie Ivers, whose style is different from Bechet's New Orleans influenced style. It was mainly Bechet's unreliability. He was absent for 3 days in succession, which made his association with Ellington short-lived. In the next installment of Duke Ellington, I'll talk about his club engagements. I'll also be talking about how his career enhanced. There's so many things. And I'm going to be talking about the 1930s era with Ellington and his band. So it's going to be a lot of moving parts to this. So that's why I'm going to be breaking them down into a whole lot of videos, so that way people don't get bored. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching. Never surrender. Never quit.